the special en-banc hearing on the DTV transition, which will also serve as our official March meeting. Thank you to our panelists on this panel and the next one, some of them returning for yet another swing at the bat, and thank you to everyone else who is attending this morning. I'm also pleased to see the media here. While I think that our trade press has done a laudable job covering the fast-changing events of the past month, and most local stations too, I must say I have found the national news media coverage more than a little wanting. Most Americans watching the national news maybe heard a small snippet back when the Delay Act was passed about the extension of the transition deadline being extended to June 12th, but they heard precious little else about the fact that many stations would be transitioning earlier. And I don't know about you, but I have run into a lot of people who told me that nothing was going to be happening transition-wise until June 12th. That was and is a message bound to create unneeded confusion. I am happy to learn that C-SPAN is here today taking this message out to the American people, and I hope other people will emulate that kind of coverage. It has been quite a month since last we met here. Since then, the final transition date was, as I said, officially moved from February 17th to June 12th. February 17th is now viewable only in the rearview mirror. It didn't turn out to be the giant switchover originally planned. Thank goodness, thank Congress, thank the President. Clearly, consumers were far from ready for such a giant leap as that would have been, so we took a smaller step. As you'll hear today, about a third of the stations transitioned nationwide, mostly in smaller TV markets. But only about 15% of consumers have thus far been significantly affected, so we have a long, long way to go to get this transition behind us. Given the time of year, I'm tempted to use a March Madness metaphor here. We may have survived the first round game, but now we need to work even harder because the games are only going to get tougher. But if there's one thing I've learned about the DTV transition, it's that there are no analogies, there are no real precedents, nothing from which to draw many parallels. This is why a phased transition is so helpful. We have additional opportunities to learn what works, what doesn't, and to apply those lessons as we move toward June 12th. It's too bad we had to get to a phased transition so painfully and so slowly, but I think the end result is actually going to be helpful. We can learn some lessons along the way, make necessary mid-course corrections, and thereby, I think, help American consumers. And that's what we're here to talk about this morning. For now, let me just set forth two of the key principles that I believe must guide us over the next few months. First, our efforts must continue to put consumers first, particularly the most vulnerable among us. For many, television is not simply a source of entertainment, but a vital source of news and information that can literally be a lifeline in an emergency situation. Second, we must tell the American people the truth. They don't want their information sugar-coated, nor do they want it alarmist. They want it straight. They will forgive a lot, but they won't forgive being lulled into a false sense that the transition will be less disruptive or less expensive than it turns out to be. So some of them are going to need new antennas in addition to those boxes to receive digital signals. Let's tell them so. If a station's coverage area has shifted and some consumers won't get a signal no matter what they do, let's tell them so. If that digital signal can be sometimes less robust than they may have thought, let's tell them so. With apologies to Jack Nicholson, consumers can handle the truth. We made some real progress, I think, in the past month. I'm particularly proud of the outstanding work of our FCC team. You'll see and hear about some of that work today. You'll see a new web-based tool developed by our FCC engineers that will help consumers understand what stations they should be able to receive at their home address and what kind of antenna even that they might need to receive them. I may be biased, but I think it's the best tool of its kind that's out there. You'll also hear some of the stories of the FCC outreach team, a group of truly dedicated public servants who have traveled far and wide to make a real difference in communities around the country. I also want to thank one more time my two colleagues, Jonathan Adelstein and Rob McDowell, both for the outreach that they do and for the leadership within that they are providing on consumer outreach, on call centers, and so much, much more. But we at the FCC are only a small piece of the puzzle. Industries, consumer groups, civil rights and civic organizations, local governments, and many others have stepped up to help the country's transition, and they have made a tremendous contribution by doing so. I thank them, but I also tell them that their work is only partly done, and the greatest part of the test is still ahead of us. I will spare everyone here just this once my spiel on how public-private partnerships are so often central to overcoming national challenges like this. Suffice it to say that working together we will make a huge difference for consumers. Who knows, we might even make the Final Four. Commissioner Elstein?
Thanks, Chairman Copps. Good to see everybody here this morning. We have this transition date of June 12th fast approaching now, and we are finally doing what we should have been doing for years, with coordination, with transparency, and with a spirit of collegiality. I'm grateful to Chairman Copps for his strong leadership on this effort, and certainly to Congress for its faith in our ability to rectify years of mismanagement, which we are doing. Thanks to Congress, most Americans weren't forced to transition to digital TV before they were ready. Instead, only about 15% of the American public was strongly affected, and only about 4% of the population saw all of their local analog channels cut off on February 17th. So while February 17th was a down payment on the transition, the balloon payment comes due on June 12th when the rest of the country switches. Well, not everyone had a smooth transition on February 17th. It did go better than expected, and we're evaluating the experiences of those who had problems. By looking at what went right and what went wrong, we can prevent much greater problems from occurring on June 12th. Most importantly, we're using this opportunity to finally implement a DTV transition plan that I've sought for years, a unified message and a coordinated national approach. Those who did transition on February 17th shed light on where we need to focus now. Specifically, we're redoubling our efforts on educating consumers about antenna issues. We're telling consumers about the need to scan and rescan, and we're dealing with signal loss problems. And we're revamping our consumer outreach efforts as well. In terms of antennas, many of those who transitioned last month, and we're going to hear more about that from our panel here, were left in the dark due to antenna issues. Many consumers need to reposition their antennas in order to receive some stations' digital signals. In some instances, antennas don't pick up both UHF and VHF stations. Consumers with antenna problems may need to look into adding an amplifier to their antenna, upgrading from an indoor to an outdoor antenna, or perhaps replacing an older antenna. And we're working with antenna manufacturers and consumer groups to provide better guidance to consumers about that. In terms of rescanning, once people have set up their converter boxes, they need to scan the channels. And if they don't do that, they're not going to receive all the digital stations that are broadcasting in their area. Failure to scan channels is a really common error that we saw on February 17th, something we anticipated, but it was certainly something that was easily corrected once people called in and we explained to people what they needed to do. As more stations make the switch between now and June 12th, and especially on June 12th, we need to remind consumers to periodically rescan to make sure they aren't missing channels as they come on to digital. And on June 12th, almost everyone affected will need to rescan, and we need to educate to prepare people for that. Otherwise, people will wake up across the country and see their channels gone, and they'll wonder what happened. All they need to do is rescan to get them. In terms of signal loss, there are a lot of regions throughout the country where we have every reason to expect that people will lose their signals for some stations. We're working with broadcasters in these areas to pinpoint potentially problematic locations and set up the necessary infrastructure to prevent those areas from going dark on June 12th, or at least to inform consumers, as the chairman said, about what to expect. I think it's better if we inform people up front rather than getting a rude awakening on June 12th. Our increase in knowledge about what to expect based on what happened February 17th, in combination with more transparent leadership that we're seeing, led us to revamp our consumer education campaign. Specifically, we're adopting a four-pronged approach to consumer education. First, we're targeting outreach efforts to populations and geographic areas that are most at risk of having problems on June 12th. Second, we're seeking to establish walk-in centers where consumers can learn firsthand how to install their converter boxes or address other problems. Third, we're identifying resources to provide in-home converter box installation for consumers with special needs. finally, we're enhancing our in-home service for consumers struggling with other technical issues. In order to implement these plans, we're coordinating our own resources and reaching out to a variety of partners. More than 200 FCC staff from our headquarters and field offices are driving this effort, and we certainly appreciate all that they've done, and they've really made a great effort over the past, and a lot of them are going to be going back out on the road, and we appreciate that. We've also enlisted the support of private companies and not-for-profit consumer-focused organizations, some of whom we'll hear from today. And at long last, we're engaging help from the AmeriCorps, National Civilian Community Corps volunteers, something I suggested in testimony before the Senate Special Committee on Aging back in September of 2007. If we had acted on that suggestion, this could have been in place already. But I'm glad we're finally doing it now with this new, stronger leadership that we've needed for so long. These partnerships will allow us to put people on the ground to provide direct assistance in underserved communities across the country. In conjunction with NTIA's implementation of the Enhanced Converter Box Coupon Program, it's crucial that we change from our earlier message of awareness to a real plan for assistance and real boots on the ground where they're needed. And I think with our current analytical and restructuring approach, I'm confident that we'll be able to mitigate the harm to consumers that would have occurred if Congress hadn't passed the DTV Delay Act. This is our last chance to get it right, and I'm confident we're doing everything we must to do so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks again for convening another en banc hearing to review our progress on the DTV transition. And now that we've gotten through February 17th, a date that will thankfully not live in infamy, but turned out to be just a first step in a rolling transition to a final nationwide analog cutoff, I look forward to an open, frank discussion about what went well and what did not. I hope that everyone is truly committed to applying the lessons learned during that period to the major challenges that lie ahead of us. I join in congratulating our hardworking staff, the broadcasters, the cable industry, and the legions of other dedicated people, including many volunteers, for a relatively successful first wave of the transition. But I expect we will hear from our panelists today about some bumps we encountered along the way in terms of reception issues, converter box problems, lack of coupons, and questions about the call center agent's level of technical expertise. I'm pleased that we'll be talking about both the good and the bad and working together to apply those lessons to the tasks ahead. Speaking realistically, February 17th is not a fully reliable harbinger of things to come on June 12th, the last and, in all likelihood, biggest of all the rolling transition dates. The February 17th transition did not end analog broadcasts in those locations, even in those communities where all stations made the switch. People in every market affected by the February turnoffs still had access to some analog programming, whether it was an enhanced analog nightlight station or full analog service by other stations. So we're still grappling with some unknowns in trying to figure out how to take the February data and project it ahead to the day when analog broadcasting will cease entirely. We still confront noteworthy hurdles because we haven't yet had a transition on a large scale in our largest cities. As I've said for months, when that big transition date does come, it will be messy in some places. While the Delay Act has given us more time to improve on our outreach efforts, extra time will not allow us to make the transition flawless. We cannot predict with perfect certainty what problems may arise and where. For instance, we know that some TV viewers who are most at risk of being left behind, the elderly, handicapped, and non-English speakers, will be hard to find and help in advance. I look forward to hearing from NTIA on coupon developments since passage of the economic stimulus bill and from the Consumer Electronics Retailer Coalition on the issue of box availability. In addition, I want to learn more from several of our witnesses about what the government, working with third-party outreach providers and volunteers, can do effectively to connect with the hardest-to-reach households. We also know that consumers in many places around the country are going to encounter reception problems, as Commissioner Adelstein was pointing out, an unwelcome surprise that may not actually emerge until analog broadcasts cease altogether. I'll be paying close attention to the insights from our experts on those issues. I also hope to hear from other witnesses, including the FCC's own outreach team, on how we should change our messaging so that viewers are better informed about potential signal losses and possible antenna problems. Thirdly, we know that our call center operations, which worked reasonably well during the February 17th period, still could stand improvement. I'm going to take this opportunity to extend our sincere thanks to our partners in the industry under the leadership of the National Cable and Telecommunications Association and the National Association of Broadcasters for working to combine what had been, as of January 26th, two separate and unrelated call centers, one under the FCC and one under the industry, into a single unified operation working with a single call-in number. Your willingness and technical skill, together with that of our own staff, improved callers' experiences. But resources going forward are limited, which could result in longer waiting times in the future. And I'm also aware that some callers were dissatisfied with the technical expertise of some call center agents, many of whom had only had a few days of limited training before they began answering the phones. We need to focus now on improving agent quality through better training, even as we weigh our resource allocations for April, May, and June. Finally, we know that many of the broadcasters who transitioned in February made concerted efforts to ensure that their viewers were informed about the upcoming transition and had one or more local contact points, including walk-in centers and local telephone numbers from which to seek help if they needed. I look forward to hearing from NAB on whether broadcasters in the markets where multiple stations transitioned together worked in an organized joint fashion on these tasks, and how the lessons learned in those markets are being passed along to broadcasters in the many markets that haven't yet made the switch. In short, does each DMA now have a DMA leader? Again, let me thank everyone involved in the DTV transition, especially Chairman Copps and Commissioner Adelstein, for their efforts, often extraordinary ones, to minimize their inevitable disruption and confusion that the analog turnoff will sure to bring. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you both. Madam Secretary, might you be good enough to take us through our agenda and schedule for the duration of the morning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you. Good morning, Commissioners. Today's agenda consists of 2 panel presentations by senior agency officials, as well as industry, consumer groups, and others involved in the digital television transition. The first panel will feature Commission and NTIA reports on the events of the partial transition of February 17, 2009, and future plans. The second panel will feature industry and consumer group reports on the events of February 17, 2009, and again, future plans. This is your agenda for today.
Thank you very much. We're going to commence with a presentation from Gary Epstein, and I just want to preface that by thanking him for the absolutely outstanding job he has done here over the past little more than a month. He came out of retirement in January in an exemplary desire to serve the public interest, and did so with true distinction to himself and credit to the Commission. Most grateful for his work. He is unfortunately going to be moving along. I tried my best to prevail on him to stay yet a while longer, but I understand. But we're all very much in your debt, Gary, and thank you for an outstanding job.
Thank you. If I could figure out how to turn this on. Is it on? Okay. Thank you very much. As Chairman Copps noted, I had the privilege of serving as a special government employee to help with the DTV transition, and it was a true privilege. It was a privilege working with the commissioners and a privilege working with the people at this table. I joined the Commission on February 26th and left at the end of last week. I was ably aided and mostly joined at the hip in this task by Rick Chesson, Chairman Copps' Chief of Staff, who also deserves a lot of credit for what happened over this time period. And I will be more than ably succeeded by Bill Lake, who is a well-respected lawyer who recently retired from WilmerHale, who also wants to do some public service, and Bill is in the audience right over there. My task here is to provide you with some background and context for both panels here for the 30 days from January 22nd, when Commissioner Copps was named acting chair, until February 20th, 3 days shortly after the transition date. And we informally called that, and you heard that from the commissioners, the end of the beginning. The two panels today will more comprehensively describe these events, some of the lessons learned, and the important plans that we have for the exactly 100 days from today until June 12th. My focus is primarily on the FCC. My colleague to the left, Bernie McGuire, will describe the good work and plans that NTIA undertook during this time period. So, first stage was what the Commission did immediately after January 22nd. In late January, it was clear, our assumption was and had to be, that there was going to be a full digital transition on February 17th, and that's how we commenced work when Chairman Copps was named acting chairman. Much work had already been done over the last 2 years, but much, much more had to be done. The commissioners identified 3 goals almost immediately. The first goal was to engage the entire commission in the digital television task. And I think that was crucial and key. It was important that there was full commissioner and full commissioner advisor participation from day one. That allowed us to move quickly, to adopt orders and to get them out within a matter of hours rather than a matter of days. We also convened daily task force meetings. You see the people at this table, and there are many others who were involved in order to plan the attack and the battle plan that we had to have for that time period. The commissioners re-engaged the consumers with a consumer advisory committee meeting during that time period to get input, and we had our first en banc. Again, to let the public know that there was a new commission and we had new plans on a going forward basis. So that was goal 1. Goal 2 was basically to get the industry and the consumer groups involved in our plan and to use their full resources. As Commissioner McDowell has already said, a key point was the unification of the call center project. We had 2 call center projects, an FCC and an industry one. They were like 2 ships passing in the night. Neither knew what the other was really doing, what the scripts were, and we quickly got them to unify that. And as Commissioner McDowell ably stated, we had a reasonably good experience on February 17th because of that. We then also, working with NTIA really for the first time in a coordinated manner, coordinated our outreach activities, both our staff activities, our field activities, and the contractors and grantees that both agencies had. So we would have a coordinated approach to outreach. And then we redeployed, we re-examined the field staff that the FCC had and determined where to send them throughout the country based upon the February 17th transition. The second important thing that we did, the goals that the Commission identified, was increased coordination across the federal government. Okay, that really was an important thing. We began to talk on almost a daily basis with NTIA. We had good calls and good exchanges of information. And just as important, we were able to get full White House support. The White House indicated its interest in coordinating and help coordinating across the FCC and NTIA, and that again was an important issue in obtaining full coordination. Well, that was really great. We were proceeding full apace. It was at the very end of January, and Congress then decided, after some fits and starts, that a delay was needed. And this was probably the last couple of days and the first couple of days of February. It became clear that Congress was going to act, and we had to switch course. We had to then implement the DTV Delay Act. For a while, we were running in parallel, assuming that we were having both a February 17th or a phase transition, but then it became much clearer that we would get congressional action. So that was in very early February. On February 5th, even before the bill was signed into law, the FCC took its first action. It issued a public notice. It recognized the twin goals of Congress. Goal number 1 was that a delay was absolutely necessary. Goal number 2 was that the Commission was required to give flexibility to stations that wanted to transition prior to the June 12th date. And that left us in a little bit of a quandary, and so what we did is that we required stations that wanted to transition on February 17th to notify the Commission by February 9th. That was crucial in allowing us to plan and go forward. We got the information on February 9th. We published the list of stations that had notified us on February 10th. There are 1,798 full-time stations. 190 had already changed or had filed to transition prior to February 17th. Of the remaining 1,578, 491, or about 31%, notified us that they were going to transition on February 17th. And it is quite clear that the Commission much appreciated the fact that two-thirds of the stations and the stations in the largest markets decided not to transition on February 17th, but to wait until June or at least to some later date. That was February 10th. On February 11th, the DTV Delay Act was actually signed into law. That very same day, on February 11th, the Commission had to decide how to go forward. And it examined and reviewed the 491 stations that had said that they were going to go on February 17th. We found that 368 could proceed with the transition, but we found that 106 of them, applying a test, that there was a significant risk of substantial public harm if those 106 stations went. And the test that was developed during that time period was markets where all four of the major networks were going to turn off, and there would be no analog service from four major networks. For those 106 stations, we developed during that time period another test. We said that they nevertheless would be able to transition on that date if they met an increased or enhanced public interest standard. The key condition in that enhanced public interest standard was what we called an enhanced nightlight service. And what the Commission's goal was that there would be, at least for 60 days after the transition, DTV information, emergency information, and some news and public affairs programming available to the people in those markets in analog. We then gave the stations, there were additional public interest considerations, but I think that was the key one for the Commission. 2 days later, we required the stations to come back in and say whether or not they would accept the enhanced public interest conditions, whether they would decide to remain on the air in analog, or whether they would make a more difficult showing that there were some exigent circumstances which nevertheless required them to transition on February 17th. The example we thought about was where someone had made a huge expenditure, the tower crew was coming, and there would be a significant public harm if the station was not allowed to transition. Well, after that time period, the stations responded. 53 stations certified compliance with the enhanced public interest standards. 43 stations changed their minds and remained analog, and that left us with a total of 10 stations. Over the weekend, and that was over a weekend, the staff examined those 10 stations, examined the rationale for why they nevertheless wanted the transition, and we developed yet another test. The test was that the circumstances had to be truly exigent or there was substantial public harms, but nevertheless we wanted to find some way that the people in that community would maintain analog service of emergency and news information. The stations, some of them were very creative. One of them came back with a proposal that they had contacted the local PBS station, and the PBS station in analog would run their news and public affairs programming. We found out a good and creative solution and suggested it to some of the other stations. So by the end of the weekend, we were able to rule and allow each of the 106 stations to either remain in analog, provide enhanced nightlight service, or otherwise provide service to the community during the transition period. That was the legal and regulatory structure that was developed over a period of about 14 days with about 3 or 4 separate orders. And again, I want to really commend the staff and the commissioners who were able to move swiftly and in coordination and able to adopt these orders in order to structure the February 17th transition date. In parallel, there was also a lot else going on. Commissioner McDowell talked about the call center projects. There were constant meetings and interactions between industry and the Commission as we sized the call centers. We wanted to make sure that there were sufficient operators for the public. Then we had to resize them when Congress passed the Delay Act And that was in the midst of contractual issues with our contractors. And again, I want to commend the industry for stepping up to the mark, being extremely cooperative, and providing a good call center service on February 17th. Again, outreach was going on in parallel. And it was NTIA's grantees and the FCC's contractors and our own field staff were coordinating. We redirected and redeployed the staff to go into the troubled markets during that 3 or 4 daytime period, so that we would have the appropriate resources where we wanted the resources to have. And again, in parallel, and maybe most important, or at least just as important, was the fact that we were in contact with individual broadcast stations, station groups, the NAB, and state broadcasting associations, because we knew that they had to carry a heavy burden and a heavy part of the load in contacting and helping consumers in the markets. And that also proved to be successful. So stage 1, that was what happened and what we did as we swiftly pivoted and implemented the Delay Act. What happened on February 17th and several days thereafter, as you've heard from Chairman Copps and the commissioners, we had a mostly uneventful and successful partial transition, and I emphasize partial. The call centers were manned 24/7. The FCC staff, consumer groups, and broadcasters were in the field. There was analog service by either a network station, enhanced nightlight, or some variation of that in every single market in the country on February 17th. So there were no real crises. And I think one broadcaster summed it up best for me when he said, "Frogs did not fall from the sky." The next step, so we had about 2 days to rest. And after February 17th, 3 days later, the Commission issued its so-called Next Steps Implementation Public Notice. What do we do now? And there were 2 parts to that public notice. There was an order part, and in the order part said, we basically have to plan for June 12th. We cannot wait. We cannot live with the requirements of what was called the third periodic 30 days notice. So we set March 17th as a date specific for stations to elect their final transition date. We also said that no station may transition prior to April 16th, and we revised consumer education and notification guidelines. In the notice part, the Commission proposed slightly modified but basically the same enhanced nightlight conditions for any station that wanted to transition prior to June 12th. We also did something new, and this was in response to something that Chairman Kopp said, and I know that Commissioner McDowell and Commissioner Allenstein agree with, is we proposed to a new requirement on stations for consumer and public interest disclosure of where there would be signal loss. We recognize that both the signal loss and the scanning issues were 2 of the lessons learned in the February 17th partial transition. And I think the Commission is dedicated to making it go easier in those 2 areas in the future. As I understand it, the comments were filed in response to the notice last night. I'm sure that the staff has already digested them, issued memos, and is getting ready for the next order. I can say that because I've gone. And as Eloise says, I know it's true. You will hear from the 2 panels in much more detail about the planning that is already in full swing for June 17th and the transition and the things that have to be done. From the panels, you will hear about what is to come. My view, it was a privilege to work on this. It was a successful beginning. It was part of a phased transition, as Chairman Kopp said. Approximately 1/3 of the stations and somewhere around 15 to 18% of the households were involved. As Commissioner McDowell says, an important point will be to what extent we can scale that up to the higher number, or we have to do new and different things. And there is still a very large task ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary, and thanks again for your Herculean efforts on this. I want to join, too, in extending our appreciation of Bill Lakes joining us, and we're looking forward to working with him. Madam Secretary, would you like to proceed with the rest of the panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your first panel today, in order of presentation, features the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Dr. Bernadette McGuire Rivera, Associate Administrator, Office of Telecommunications and Information Applications. From the FCC, you will hear from Eloise Gore, Associate Bureau Chief of the Media Bureau, Kathy Seidel, Chief of Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, Patrick Weber, a Legal Advisor in Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, and Julia Snap, the Office of Engineering and Technology, and Andrew Martin, Chief Information Officer from the Office of the Managing Director. In consideration of Dr. McGuire-Rivera's time constraints, the Chairman and Commissioners will have an opportunity to ask her questions immediately after her presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Copps and Commissioners. Thanks for inviting NTIA here today and speaking for Acting Assistant Secretary Gomez and all of us at NTIA. We want to thank you not just for your leadership, but for your active involvement, having the Chairman and Commissioners pop in on conference calls and meetings, having Commissioners making test calls to the call center. This has all made a real difference for all of us working on this, and it shows that it's not just a priority, but it's something that all of us are going to work towards. It's really been a sea change in that regard. Now, this morning we'd like to report to you what NTIA has done with the extra time and funding that Congress has provided for us. First, I am very happy to announce that we have begun to pass out coupons from the waiting list. We have a new enhanced processing capability where we can now send out 2 million coupons a week, and we will be able to get through about 4 million coupons on the waiting list, we think, in about 2.5 weeks. So for us, that is very good news. There'll be a formal press release coming out from the agency later today on that. We also can send the coupons faster. We are using the additional funding for first-class mail and enhancements in the number of banks that are participating in the coupon system. So now what used to take 21 days will now take 9 days. We've been able to boost our own call center and integrate it with the FCC's call center with the goal that come June 12th, everyone should be able to get their call answered the first time they call. And hopefully within the one call, they'll be able to have help with whatever their problems may be, whether it's getting a coupon or whether it's a reception problem or some other question. The funding will also allow us to issue approximately 12 million new coupons, and we expect, depending on redemption rates, to have another 1.5 million or 3 million coupons available for distribution. Very shortly, we will release a rulemaking that will change our rules to allow reissuance of coupons to individuals who had a coupon that expired but they did not redeem it. We're in the process of retrofitting our system now, so when the rule becomes effective, we'll be able to move with that. And again, I expect that will be a week or two, and then we'll have another announcement for that. We are also changing the rules so we can use an alternative mechanism to deliver coupons other than the U.S. mail. We don't have any firm plans on exactly how that would operate right now, but that's something that we're looking into. And, of course, the rules will have some technical revisions to change all of the dates. Now, most importantly, the new legislation allows up to $90 million to be spent on consumer education and technical assistance, and NTIA and the FCC are working diligently to maximize the use of these dollars. NTIA will focus on the approximately 5 million households who are still totally unready for the transition. They have only over-the-air television, and they do not have a converter box. And we want to really continue our emphasis on vulnerable populations, seniors, minorities, low income, the disabled, and rural residents. Yet we don't intend to continue to do what we did over the last 15 months. This is a unique group, the last 5 million households. Clearly, they are in a special circumstance that prevents them from obtaining a coupon, buying the box, and installing it. Because this has been, I will say, a very successful information campaign where 95% of the population are aware, but yet this last group needs special attention. In fact, our theme for Phase 2 of the coupon program is search and rescue. Right now, we're conducting some focus groups with these unready households to try to understand why they have not gotten prepared and what we can do to help them get prepared. And we also are, in fact, we're meeting with Commission staff and the Nielsen Company today. They've done a special study for us that goes just beyond, goes a little deeper than just we want to know more. Who are these 5 million households and what is there in the Nielsen information that we can use to redo our consumer ed materials in a way that not only has the right information but says it in a way that these people can understand. Our grantees are working in 42 states and over 180 cities with on-the-ground support, and I think from the early transition, that's one of the most important lessons that we've learned, is that this is a very effective way to help people make the transition. These people are helping not only get coupons, installing the box, sort of working the local area to get some box donations. And we're looking now, as we go into the second phase, to complement the industry broadcast and cable ads with something that we think will get more to these special groups. For example, advertising on transit systems, bus signs. Also, we've learned that a lot of the people who are left are young, in the 18 to 35 demographic. So we're looking at maybe using some of the new media and social networking to get the word out to this group. And we've also are going to looking at sort of stealing one of NAB's ideas of the mobile truck, and maybe have some local mobile units that will go around and find people and help them get coupons. And all of this, I think, is going to be helped because we're working closer with the FCC, and we can concentrate and with the broadcasters to get someone in each city who knows the local area that can reach out to these people and make sure that no one is left behind. So again, speaking for all of us at NTIA, we want to thank you for your leadership, and we look forward to this continued teamwork to get us to a successful June 12th.
Well, thank you so much, and I know you have to leave soon, so we'll maybe take a couple of minutes and just fire a few questions your way. But I do want to say thanks for the remarkable cooperation and relationship between the FCC and NTIA, and as somebody who in a previous life walked the halls of the Department of Commerce and worked there, I'm just delighted to see these two teams of very able public servants working together, and your leadership has so much to do with that, and it's most appreciated. You mentioned the number of coupons expired, and that there may be a way to reactivate some of those. How many of those coupons do we estimate are out there that are expired and could possibly be?
Okay, there were 16 million coupons expired. Wow. Now, whether I don't think all of those people will be coming back,
right,
but we're counting on maybe if half of them would come back.
Okay. And how many applications are coming in now for converter boxes? Do we?
Okay, now that's one thing. The applications have gone down,
right,
as of late. They've been down. I think last week the average was 38,000 a day, and when we were in our peak, there were days we were getting, right, 500,000, right, and that's sort of the average for the year is 124,000. So right now they're down.
Which again, I think shows the need to get the message out so people don't just think, well, I have until June to do this, because a lot of stations, in point of fact, will be transitioning in the latter part of April and in May too. There were some press stories about whether consumers who live in group homes and other single-room occupancy situations can get coupons, and the basic answer was no, that coupons only went to households as defined by the Census Bureau. I know that NTIA has expanded the definition of eligible consumers now to include nursing homes. Is there a chance of expanding the definition of eligible households to those who live in situations like I've just outlined?
Yeah, this situation with the single-room occupancies, and for people who aren't familiar, it's the old-time boarding house where you have one person is living in a room. They had not been eligible because not just because of the census definition, but there was an underlying part of it too. That one thing that we've been very careful with the coupon program, and it's one of the reasons we've had hardly any waste, fraud, and abuse, is that it's very hard to validate that it's an actual person and an actual address. So, but now that we're towards the end of this, one of the things I think that we've learned and that we can use to address this problem is, rather than just simply making them eligible for a coupon, I think particularly with this group, doesn't do the trick. These are people who, quite frankly, probably can't make the $20 copayment. They're in a situation where they're not going to, even if we make them eligible, they're not going to see the information. So I think this is something where you got to go an little extra step. And one of our grantees, who has the Technical Assistance Center in San Francisco, has actually been in that area finding where these particular homes are and actually reaching out and seeing if they could use a coupon, or they have been able to get box donations. So that is a very, I think, a more, it's a really, you're really helping to make youth change. You're not just giving them a coupon, because I think a lot of times you can give someone a coupon, and we went through this a lot with the nursing homes. Just because they have a coupon, if you're in a nursing home, you're not going to get in a car and go down to Walmart. And so we are looking at this as a model that we can push in this phase to really go out and find people in these special situations and give them the help they need, sort of beyond just making them eligible.
That's good. Commissioner Allenstein?
Well, thank you. First, I wanted to take the opportunity to thank Gary Epstein for his great effort on our behalf. I think, as you said, the frogs didn't fall from the sky. I bet you caught a lot of frogs or helped us to make sure that we did. So we thank you, and I know it wouldn't have gone as smoothly as it did if you hadn't helped. And thank you for all of your willingness to come back and help. And we're looking forward, Bill, to your assistance in filling those big shoes. And Mr. McGarver, thank you for all you've done at NTIA. I imagine you've seen a dramatic increase in the coordination between the FCC and the NTIA, as Chairman Copps indicated. Have you seen huge fruits as a result of the increased coordination between us since January 22nd?
Yeah, and one of the things, too, I think, is because, I mean, all of us here at the table have worked very closely together over the past, 15 months. But there's a big difference when the people at the top think what you're doing is a good thing and it ought to be done and you ought to put every maximum bit of effort on it. So, as I said initially, just having the leadership and the involvement of the commissioners and the chairman has made the hugest difference, I think, for all of us at the table.
I'm glad to hear that. I was begging
just
for
the
an
simple,
interagency.
some of the simple things of Gary has just been terrific. He just sort of swooped in, and the daily meetings, it sounds sort of bureaucratic, but it really helped and got people sort of into a new culture.
I was begging for an interagency task force for about a year and a half. But you can talk about mechanisms, but if there isn't actual leadership and willingness on the top to say, we're going to coordinate, we're going to have these meetings, we're going to really work together as one government, because we may be different agencies, but we're one government, we serve one people. And that's what we're proving now, and that's the kind of unification, and we're going to continue that, not just with NTA, but every agency of government, because we're now enlisting the help of all kinds of different agencies in a way that is coming from the White House on down. We could never get the White House's attention until there was a new occupant. And now we're getting incredible attention from the White House, which is in a unique position to coordinate across different agencies. So we thank you for helping out on that effort. One of the issues that came up at our last en banc was about boxes, converter boxes, whether there's sufficient capacity to meet all the demands that we're going to see going up to June 12th. And I know we're going to hear from Chris McLean of the Consumer Electronics Retailers Coalition later. But I'm curious, from your perspective, we see EchoStar's stop production of its cheap $40 box. Do you think there'll be enough cheap converter boxes to meet the demand of consumers through the end of the transition?
Well, this is a concern we share with you, particularly in releasing the coupons. We have worked very closely with CERC and jointly decided that if we put these coupons out, that there should be inventory to meet people who go to get their boxes, and we will continue to share detailed by zip code data with the retailers to let them know who is ordering a coupon so they can be ready for them.
Well, I hope there will be, and we'll look forward to hearing more about that. You talked about prioritization of your resources and where you're focusing. I'm curious, as you look at the Nielsen data, are you talking about prioritizing based on markets that are at risk, on households in particular, and are you looking at things like markets that have already gone digital? If you get requests from places like Wilmington or Hawaii that have already gone all digital, are you going to make sure that the consumers in those areas get the coupons faster?
Right now, with the new processing, we will be able to take everybody's order every day, so there's not going to be really any reason to hold anybody else's back unless we get into another waiting list situation, which, please, we do not want to do that. But we have set the system up now. If for some reason at the end we have a huge spike, that we will be able to send out over-the-air households their coupons first before the cable and pay households, because we still get a substantial number of requests from households that have a pay service in addition to having another over-the-air TV. So we will be able to take care of that.
Thank you.
Commissioner McDowell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to keep this brief. And again, thanks to Gary and in arrears, and thanks to Bill in advance, and sympathies as well. And Bill, I'm going to bestow upon you now the moniker of the closer. Okay, you're going to help bring us over the goal line here. So, Bernie, just real quick on the timeline of things, and this is similar to some questions I asked your colleague last month at our en banc. Okay, you have a rulemaking which is going to, you estimate, is going to go out when?
I would say very shortly. It's in final clearance. So
this week, next week, maybe?
Let's say within the next 2 weeks.
Okay, within the next 2 weeks. Okay.
If not before then.
Okay. And then how long is the comment period for that?
Those will be rules that will go into effect on publication.
On publication, okay. And
It's a very simple rulemaking. It just has the, we can use something other than postage. We will reissue, and it changed the date. So it's not a very complicated matter.
Okay.
So once it comes out, we can do all the other things that the Act allowed us to do.
So I'm just trying to drill down here a little bit on the timeline between now and June 12th to make sure, and in some cases between now and April or May, is to make sure that those coupons are moving through the pipe as quickly as possible. So today the backlog on coupons.
We are starting to. The backlog should be done 2.5 weeks from today. So we are starting to process those coupons. We did not have to do a rulemaking.
So it'll be done 2.5 weeks from today. Okay. Mm-hmm. And just out of curiosity, what were the improvements in the coupon factory, as I called it before, to get it processed so quickly, to increase your bandwidth? We're at the FCC. To increase your bandwidth at the coupon factory.
We did several things. One was the move from bulk postage to first class postage. We added, the coupon is almost like, it is a Visa card, really. We added the number of banks that are creating accounts, so we can now do 2 million accounts a week. So we can send more coupons out, and they can also, and they're doing it faster. So they shaved several days off that way. And we have also enhanced our waste, fraud, and abuse checks, so we can do the checks faster. So combining all of that together, actually, it really pretty much cuts the time in half.
Okay, and I just wanted to follow up, maybe I didn't hear it entirely clearly with Commissioner Adelstein. Will you prioritize first-time coupon applicants over expired coupon reapplicants, or do you not need to do that based on
We don't
your
need to do that unless
Okay.
we get into a waiting list situation.
And do you mentioned that earlier, so do you what could happen to where you would end up in a waiting list situation, given what you just explained? It sounds to me like it's not going to happen unless you
I don't think
run
it
out of
would.
money.
If it happened this time, it would almost be because everybody waited until June 11th. And so if you have 5 million coupon requests and you can only send out 2 million, they would wait. Or there's some pent-up demand that we will go through all the coupons that we have. And this time we will be watching very closely, and if it looks any way at all like we're going to run out of coupons, people will know well in advance. The other thing I think in terms of avoiding a waiting list situation is that we all work very closely in our targeted advertising, because one of the things we want to get we don't want people to get all excited, and because quite frankly, I don't know, maybe it's my own age, there are people who might have ordered a coupon last January and they hear this ad and they go, oh my God, I need to get another one. So we just don't, we have to make sure that people understand maybe a little better what you need the coupon for, so the people who are getting them actually need them.
Well, and part of my message, and I'll just say in closing, part of my message since last summer has been, unless you really need the coupon, don't get it, because foreseeing the glitches that did actually arise. But so that'll be my message. Feel free to disagree with that, but that's still my message. And it's a personal thing, because both my siblings, I had a brother and a sister, apply for coupons. They didn't need those coupons, and I've gotten after them for that. So anyway, back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So the message clearly is, if you don't have those coupons, apply for the coupon. When you get the coupon, go out and get the box and hook it up and start enjoying the DTV world right now. We know the whistle is blowing down at the coupon factory, and that you're expected down there, so we're happy to excuse you, but thank you again for being with us and for everything that you're doing.
Thank you very much for accommodating my time, and thank you all again for your leadership. It has just made all the difference in the world to us.
Thank you. And I think we'll proceed down the line here and hold our questions for the rest of the panel until each one has made their presentation. So we'll start with Eloise Gore.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, and I want to extend my thanks also to Gary, not only for the work that he did over the month plus that he was with us that so facilitated the success surrounding February 17th, but also because he covered many of the issues I was going to cover, and so he's enabling me yet again to speed up the presentation. I will add a few color commentary points. As he described, we had a series of public notices and orders through the beginning part of February once Congress and then the President took action. One of the points that he mentioned was that we had received notifications from 491 stations on February 9th that they wanted to transition on February 17th. And in addition to what Gary described, we did, the Media Bureau in consultation with our OET colleagues, looking at the coverage areas of the stations to make the determination that Gary was mentioning about whether to make sure that there would be a major network affiliate still available on the air, not only just looking at the market designation, but also looking at the actual analog contour of the stations, so that in some cases we discovered, as I'll mention in a moment, that although there appeared to be a major network affiliate in a market, it wasn't really covering the whole area, and so there were additional adjustments that needed to be made, and it's important to keep that in mind because it influences what we did later on in the rulemaking. As Gary discussed, the numbers came out as follows. After the adjustments that we made and the PNs back and forth on the 5th, the 9th, the 11th, the 13th, the analysis over that long weekend, looking at the exigent circumstances that came to us and the creative ideas that we had, in the end, 417 stations terminated their analog signals on February 17, 2009. Adding this number to the 220 stations that had previously transitioned, some of them well before and some of them just in the days prior, this meant that a total of 637 stations had transitioned as of February 17, 2009, representing roughly 1/3 of all the full power stations. Nevertheless, these 637 stations represent only 13 entire designated market areas, including Honolulu and Wilmington, North Carolina, which had, of course, transitioned well prior, and also Guam, which is not actually a designated market area. As our chart, as our chart shows, these completely transitioned markets represent less than 2.5% of TV households nationwide, and only 2% of households that rely solely on over-the-air broadcast service. We calculated that the transition of these 637 stations had a significant impact in 74 markets. That includes the ones that we just mentioned, the ones where there was a complete transition, and an additional 60. This was based on the assumption that the loss of 2 or more major network affiliates is significant, or one major affiliate in markets with only 1 or 2 major affiliates to start with. We also identified 6 additional markets in which particular areas within the market would be significantly affected by major network affiliates terminating analog service. As I mentioned before, this would be a segment of a market that would potentially not be served by a major network affiliate. Of course, they continue to provide the enhanced nightlight service. This left us with a total of 80 markets, that's out of 210 DMAs overall, that have completely transitioned or were significantly affected by the transition thus far. Taking all of this data together, the overall impact in these 80 markets affected just over 15% of TV households and 15.5% of over-the-air only households. These percentages illustrate that although the partial transition on February 17th was significant, it affected only a small number and percentage of households across the United States. While we are very proud of the successful results and relatively smooth transition on the 17th, we must be mindful that this is just the beginning and that the larger impacts lie ahead of us. We have learned much from the events and actions on the 17th. My colleagues here at the table will describe these lessons learned for outreach, the call center, and signal coverage. Our lessons learned in the Media Bureau were forged quickly from February 4th to the 17th and became the basis for the Commission's regulatory actions to implement the DTV Delay Act as we proceed through the next phase of the DTV transition. We recognize the importance of providing a smooth and orderly transition for consumers while also offering broadcasters flexibility as to their transition timing. We believe that the continued presence of analog service from at least one major network affiliate eased the transition by other stations in the market on February 17th. We also believe that the enhanced nightlight service did indeed offer analog viewers critical information about both local news and events as well as about the transition. As Gary also described, on February 20th, the Commission issued a report and order and notice of proposed rulemaking that addressed the most important issues to implement the DTV Delay Act going forward. Most salient for our discussion today, the order and notice set forth the next steps for stations as they plan their transition, which in turn will enable us to plan for the phased or rolling transition across the country between now and June 12th. The order clearly favored continuation of analog service through June 12th, the deadline chosen by Congress and the President to provide additional time for viewers to prepare for the transition and for the Commission and other governmental agencies to assist them. We also recognized, as Congress did, stations' need for flexibility and established March 17th as the date by which all stations that have not yet transitioned must inform the Commission of their plans. We selected this date to give stations time to consider their plans, to give the Commission time to complete the rulemaking, and to allow for stations to complete their transition as early as mid-April, but no earlier. As my colleagues here will explain, advanced planning for outreach and call center readiness is essential. We already experienced turning on a dime from February 17th to June 12th and back to February 17th again to react to the early transition of over 400 stations scattered across the country. Going forward, we need time to prepare and to provide an orderly process for consumers, broadcasters, and others affected by the transition. The advance notice of stations' transition plans is critical to providing that time. I will say a little bit more about the notice, which proposed that we adopt measures that we found successful in the run-up to February 17th. Stations that want to transition early must broadcast specific viewer notifications, including a crawl for the 7 days prior to the transition. Major network affiliates may transition only if, and these are the proposals that were in the NPRM, there will be at least one major network affiliate that will continue to provide analog service through June 12th to at least 90% of the station's viewers, either with full analog programming or with local news, public affairs, DTV transition education, and emergency information, otherwise known as enhanced analog nightlight. Station would also commit to providing outreach and assistance concerning the transition in its community, such as walk-in clinics to demonstrate installation of converter boxes and telephone call centers. And the station provides specific viewer notifications for at least 30 days prior to termination and additional crawls for 7 days prior to the termination date. We also recognize, as we did surrounding February 17th, that some stations may have a genuine hardship situation, whether financial or technical, that necessitates early transition. The notice proposes that we consider such showings from stations in conjunction with alternative means by which they can assure their viewers of continued analog service until June 12th, perhaps utilizing the creative measures, as Gary described, developed by the stations seeking to terminate on February 17th. The notice also sought comment on revisions to the consumer education requirements to ensure that broadcasters will provide information about potential analog signal loss, to inform their viewers about the need to adjust their antennas, and to remind their viewers to rescan. It's particularly important that individual stations provide this information because they know best what's happening in their market, they know if they're changing channels, and they know what their viewers need to do to continue to receive them. The comment period did indeed close yesterday. We were still getting the comments last evening. We've received so far, by our count, over 30 comments. We are hard at work at reviewing the comments and drafting the order. My colleagues back in the Media Bureau are doing that now. And we do expect to have the order ready for Commission review early next week. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to provide this brief overview of the activities in the Media Bureau as we work together to implement the DTV Delay Act and smooth the way to the new transition deadline for television viewers across the country. We have much ahead of us, and I am glad that we have the superb staff here to make it happen with your support and guidance.
Thanks very much, and we should pause just for a moment to commend your leadership in getting these orders out and really turning on a dime, and they have to be done with a lot of exactitude. They have to be comprehensive. Lots of people have input into them, obviously, but you've played a huge role in keeping those trains running on the orders, so thank you very much. Kathy Seidel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, for allowing me to provide a report on the FCC's DTV outreach efforts and our experiences with the February 17th transition. I will provide some highlights of our work and what we learned, and then you will hear from Patrick Weber, who will provide more detail about our efforts in local communities around the country. As you know, in the weeks and months prior to February 17th, outreach was conducted by FCC staff in every DMA in the country. After passage of the Delay Act, we focused our boots-on-the-ground consumer education, action, and assistance campaign on the markets that had network affiliates transitioning on February the 17th. Based on filings received from broadcast stations, we deployed FCC staff, sometimes within hours of those filings, to be in 103 DMAs plus Puerto Rico for the week of February the 17th. One of the key lessons learned from the February 17th transition is that it was critical to have staff on the ground in each of the markets where stations were completing their transitions. However, as you heard today from others, only about 1/3 of all full-power TV stations have completed their transitions to all digital broadcasting. Further, because the stations that completed their transitions reach only about 15% of the nation's households, many more consumers will be affected by stations yet to complete their transitions. It is therefore anticipated that the Commission will be unable to adequately staff, with FCC resources alone, all of the markets that will be completing their transitions by June 12th. We must identify organizations that are willing to help and that can be trained in advance so that they can perform a role similar to the one provided by FCC personnel in terms of outreach. This is especially true considering the large populations of some of the markets that will be completing their transitions on the 12th. Hence, a key element of our outreach plan going forward will emphasize partnerships with local, state, and tribal governments and community-based organizations for outreach and consumer assistance. A second lesson learned is the importance of full-service walk-in help centers for consumers in local communities. As you will hear from Patrick, these centers are critical as places where people can go to get answers to their questions about the transition, apply for coupons, learn how to install and operate their converter box, and get assistance with respect to basic antenna and reception issues. While some people will call the call center to get help, as you will soon hear from Andrew, there will be many consumers who will want to go to a place where someone can actually show them, not just tell them, how to prepare for the transition. Similarly, the Wilmington, Hawaii, and February 17th transitions all taught us that there will be some consumers who will need in-home assistance. We need to identify in advance and train organizations that will provide this level of support as trusted sources for consumers in communities throughout the country. Toward that end, we will continue to encourage local community-based organizations, local governmental offices, and other local entities to volunteer the resources needed to host and staff walk-in centers and to provide in-home installation assistance. But we expect that many organizations may need funding in order to provide these services. Therefore, with the potential for funding to be made available as a result of the economic stimulus package, we anticipate working closely with NTIA and the FCC releasing a solicitation potentially seeking proposals for walk-in centers and in-home installation assistance. The potential funding provides further opportunity for local governmental entities, grassroots organizations, and other community-based organizations to provide the necessary hands-on assistance that many consumers will require. We encourage such organizations to be thinking now about how they might be able to do that. We also learn lessons about messaging for consumers. As Patrick will tell you, we were receiving daily, and in some cases even more frequent, reports from our staff around the country. From these reports early on, it became apparent that we needed to emphasize the importance of scanning and rescanning for channels. This was also reinforced by what we were hearing from broadcasters with respect to the calls and questions that they were receiving directly. We subsequently issued another consumer scanning guide, and our on-the-ground staff emphasized scanning even more in their outreach efforts. Going forward, we know we will need to continue to get timely reporting about the challenges consumers are facing so that we can, again, prepare useful and timely information that can be made available to consumers by our on-the-ground staff and other partners, as well as through the agents answering calls from consumers at the call center. Another challenge we know consumers experienced on February 17th was knowing whether and how they needed to reposition their antenna in order to receive some stations' digital channels, whether they needed an antenna altogether, or whether they were just outside of the area in which they would receive the station they were looking for. It should be noted that, just like what we saw in Wilmington and Hawaii, in some cases what consumers thought were antenna or reception issues turned out not to be antenna or reception issues, but rather issues of the consumer just needing a little extra assistance in getting their converter box installed correctly and or scanning for channels. In any event, to address the questions from consumers about what they could expect in terms of reception of certain channels in their own area, as you will hear from Julie Knapp shortly, the FCC developed and made available a very useful mapping tool. Going forward, we need to focus our outreach efforts even more on antenna and reception issues and related questions from consumers. We also envision that organizations that have walk-in centers and who provide in-home assistance will also need to focus more on being able to answer antenna questions from consumers and help consumers with those issues. And the last lesson learned I'd like to mention is the importance not only of developing timely consumer messaging and tools for consumers to help them with the transition, but also the importance of having adequate time to train our own staff and other partners who will be in or traveling to communities throughout the country, as well as the hundreds or thousands of agents who will be answering calls from consumers. The additional time afforded by the Delay Act should enable us to do so. As others have already stated, much work remains. Our outreach going forward will capitalize on the talents and dedication of the people who have been working for and with us to help prepare consumers in communities throughout the country. We will build on the existing strong partnerships with industry, governmental, and community-based organizations, and we will foster new ones. We will endeavor to find ways to assist organizations who may be willing to establish walk-in centers and or who are trusted sources in the community and willing to conduct in-home assistance, but who may need funding to do so. As NTIA noted as well, we will continue to target our efforts toward reaching and assisting the most vulnerable consumers at risk of being left behind if they fail or are unable to act. We will continue to emphasize the importance of consumers preparing now, not later, and we will encourage everyone who is prepared to help others who may not be. We have a long road ahead of us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for all of your leadership and good work in this, and we'll go now to Patrick Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, for allowing me the opportunity to report on the FCC's DTV on-the-ground outreach efforts during the week of February 17th, 2009. For some time now, a team of FCC volunteers have been performing DTV outreach throughout the country. Each volunteer is assigned to one of 6 regions: Pacific, West Central, Southwest, Southeast, East Central, and Northeast. Each region has an FCC regional coordinator, and within each region are FCC DMA coordinators, who have been working with the broadcast stations, state broadcasters associations, local government offices and officials, consumer electronics retailers, government contractors and grantees, community-based organizations, and other key partners in their DMAs. By the week of February 17th, we had many seasoned FCC DTV consumer outreach and education specialists who were able to mobilize quickly into the DMAs that had one or more network affiliates transitioning that week. As Kathy mentioned, FCC staffers were in 103 DMAs plus Puerto Rico during the week of February 17th. FCC on-the-ground staff followed a specific action plan during that week that featured the following daily activities. We stayed in close contact with the broadcast stations completing their transitions to assist with their consumer activities such as walk-in centers, phone banks, community events, and messaging. Our on-the-ground staff we're also able to learn about any technical issues or problems that may have arisen and act as a liaison for the Commission. We set up and staffed ad hoc walk-in help centers at libraries, county or local government buildings, community-based organization locations, retail locations, or at the broadcaster's facilities. Our on-the-ground staff were able to answer consumer questions about the transition, provide converter box demonstrations, assist with antenna and reception issues, and help consumers apply for coupons. We visited local government offices to ensure that they understood what was happening, that they knew which stations in their areas were completing their transitions, which ones were not, and which ones may be providing an enhanced nightlight service for their viewers. Our on-the-ground staff also provided local government offices with answers to frequently asked questions and shared copies of key consumer publications, such as our converter box installation guides, our antenna fact sheet, and our troubleshooting guide. We also visited libraries to encourage them to establish an ad hoc walk-in help center for consumers during the week of February 17th. Our on-the-ground staff also offered to train librarians and their staff on key messages, answers to frequently asked questions, and on how to conduct converter box demonstrations for consumers. We visited local retail outlets that sold digital analog converter boxes to check availability, price points, and features such as analog pass-through capability. We delivered media kits to the local newspapers and radio stations, and we visited fire departments and other community-based organizations to alert them to the transition and what it meant for consumers. Our on-the-ground staff also provided headquarters with daily, detailed reports on their DMAs, including the status of local call centers, walk-in centers, and in-home assistance services, as well as the overall state of affairs of the DMA, any challenges they encountered, and any actionable items. We received important real-time information from our on-the-ground staff, and many success stories were reported. For instance, 2 of our staff members who are DMA coordinators for markets with stations that were not completing their transitions on February 17th were deployed to Rockford, Illinois, where all of the top 4 network affiliates were completing their transitions on or before February 17th. With very little lead time, our coordinators were able to establish and staff walk-in help centers at 4 libraries and a community center in Rockford. The broadcast stations promoted the walk-in centers by providing the locations and their days and hours of operations. Over the course of 3 long-hour days, our coordinators were able to help approximately 400 consumers and answer questions about coupons, converter boxes, and antenna and reception issues. It's also worth noting that because of the required rapid pace involved in the FCC's implementation of the DTV Delay Act, our on-the-ground staff had to be mobilized to DMAs throughout the country in a matter of days, and in some instances, plans had to be changed on the fly based on the information we were receiving real-time from the stations. For instance, the week prior to February 17th, when we received notification from all of the top 4 network affiliates in Dayton, Ohio, that they planned to complete their transitions by February 17th, our DMA coordinator for Dayton, Ohio, made travel arrangements and immediately set up meetings and events to be taking place in the next few days. After he arrived in Dayton, we received notice from all of the top 4 network affiliates that they had decided to remain on in analog. We had to quickly redeploy our coordinator to Parkersburg, West Virginia, where the sole network affiliate had decided to end analog service on February 16th. Our coordinator was able to hit the ground running there, meeting with the station's general manager and local officials, dropping off press kits, and providing information to local radio stations and newspapers, and visiting a number of consumer electronics retailers. While we have been conducting consumer education and outreach for some time, and we were actively engaged in the early transitions completed in Wilmington, North Carolina, and Hawaii, we were able to obtain additional real-world experience as a result of our on-the-ground operations throughout the country during the week of February 17th. Some of the key takeaways of our experience, none of which came as a surprise, include the following. The involvement of the local broadcast stations in providing specific information to their viewers of the changes taking place in their market is of paramount importance. The stations are best prepared and most effective in responding to issues and questions from viewers regarding reception and coverage areas of their digital signals. Full-service walk-in centers, particularly those where the broadcast stations are able to assist with staffing and messaging, are helpful in that they provide a physical location for consumers to get more information about the transition, especially on the more detailed issues such as performing channel scans with a converter box and issues involving antennas and the reception of certain channels. TV and radio station interviews, call-in shows, and local newspaper stories about the transition have a wide impact in the market. and can be beneficial to consumers by devoting the time necessary to explain some of the more difficult issues that may be market and station specific. A segment of the population will require in-home assistance in order to properly connect and operate their converter boxes and troubleshoot any potential problems. A need exists in each community for in-home assistance providers, and the most effective providers are local trusted sources like faith-based and other community organizations, Area on Aging volunteers, Meals on Wheels drivers, and firefighters. The DTV Delay Act will allow many consumers who have not yet received their coupons the time necessary to receive and redeem them and get their converter boxes installed and operating before their local broadcast stations complete their transitions. However, and despite the best efforts of all those involved in education and outreach, many consumers will delay purchasing their converter boxes and connecting them. Therefore, we must all be prepared for a last-minute rush of calls and questions regarding how to connect converter boxes and how to troubleshoot potential antenna and reception issues. In addition to the education and outreach that we have been conducting in each DMA throughout the country, we have found that our recent on-the-ground efforts have worked well to ensure that consumers are prepared and that market and station-specific issues can be quickly addressed. We hope to replicate these successes in markets that will be completing their transitions in the next few months. Going forward, we will have more lead time to train those charged with consumer education and outreach, including those on the ground, those staffing walk-in centers, and those answering calls. We will also be able to develop more specific outreach plans for each transitioning market. As others here have mentioned, however, the stations that have completed their transitions are in predominantly small and mid-sized markets. We will need assistance to be effective, particularly in the markets with larger populations that will require more staff and more resources. While we know that there are many challenges ahead, we look forward to continuing to work with our existing public and private partners to educate consumers and ensure that they are prepared for the end of full-power analog broadcasting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Having traveled to many markets with Patrick, Kathy, Louis Sagalas, Roger Goldblatt, and others, it's just amazing to me the granularity of knowledge that you folks acquire on particular markets. I think you could probably write an encyclopedia of local markets among you across the United States, but it's really helpful. Julie Knapp.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Last month, I reported on the various kinds of reception issues that people may encounter as a result of the DTV transition. These issues can include possible loss of service due to changes in a station's coverage area or a change from a VHF channel to a UHF channel. On February 11th, we made available a new DTV mapping tool on the FCC's DTV website. The mapping tool has proven to be very useful to our call centers, to consumers, to our outreach team, because they can use it to put in a location and then determine what channels people should be able to receive at that spot. The mapping tool was developed by two engineers from the Media Bureau, and they're sitting right behind me, John Gabrish and Allison Nepluck. And they did a fabulous job on this. I'd like to take a minute to show you how this works. I've done many presentations here at the Commission. This is probably the most dangerous one because I'm live on the Internet. Anything can happen. What you see on the screen is the FCC's DTV transition webpage, www.dtv.gov, which was recently revamped, and I think it's been much improved because it highlights right on the first page the converter box program, how to go about buying a converter box, how to install a converter box, and how to fix reception problems. And down at the bottom here, although you can also access it from the Fix Reception Problems page, I'm going to click on the page for the DTV reception maps. Now, up in the upper left-hand corner, I can type in an address, a zip code, coordinates. What I'm going to do is put in the FCC's address. Now, what it's doing, it brought up, fortunately, I got close enough that it shows a map of Washington, D.C. And on the left-hand side, what you see is a list of the stations that are available here. They're color-coded. The ones that are green are showing a strong signal. The ones that are yellow, moderate. Then the tan are the weak signals. And then on the bottom is where there's no signal. So now I have a general idea of the stations that are putting a strong signal at this location. So now let me click on any given station. So I picked ABC, WJLA. That opens a submenu. It says it's ABC, it's channel 7, it's RF channel, not to get too techie, is channel 7, the power level that's received, the direction to the tower, and also what clicked up on the map, the little yellow antenna tower. And the reason you'd want to know that is it tells you where to aim your antenna. And if I click on multiple stations, I sometimes will find, in many cases, the towers are all in the same place. Sometimes they're in different directions. And what that tells me is if I want to receive all those stations, I may have to take special steps like getting a rotor for my outdoor antenna, or what's called a smart antenna that can pick up signals from multiple directions. It also provides some information, and this is all linked into the Commission's master database on the stations. So it's got the latest information, and it tells you, for example, in this case, that their pre-transition channel is 39, and that they're planning to do their full transition on the 12th, at least based on the information that we have right now. And then I can click on this icon on the bottom, or for the gain or loss map. This is a little small in this display. I can assure you that I can blow it up and look at any part of the market. And what I'm seeing on this is for each station, both its analog and its digital coverage. And what I see here is that the analog and digital coverage is about the same. The green spots are where maybe I can do a little better with digital than I did with analog. And there's a couple of spots where I may have some reception issues. Part of that may be because we're using a much lower power generally on digital. And then lastly, let me go back. The other thing that I can do with this is switch to, this is all Google Maps, the satellite view. And then I can bore down to, I knew I'd end up clicking on the map itself. Let me keep this in the middle. I can zero in on the location. Just keep this in the center. And the reason I would want to do this is to see, well, I've moved the spot we were at. I just moved the FCC 4 blocks away. In any event.
So some people might like to see it go in the river.
I won't do that. The reason this is important is I want to see the buildings that are around me, if there's any objects or buildings that are going to shadow my reception. And particularly, here we all know we've got other buildings close by, but in parts of the country where they click on the map and it says it's a strong signal, and not without realizing just across the street is a 10-story building that's shadowing me, so maybe I've got some problems there. In any event, that sums up what we did with the mapping tool. The maps are designed to work hand in hand with our consumer antenna guide, which was updated just on February 15th. And the guide provides general information about antennas. And then we also put color codes to show that correspond to the maps to show the kinds of antennas that you might use in a green area versus a tan area, and try to give consumers some tips about how to go about obtaining those kinds of antennas. One of the lessons that we learned from the transitions that occurred as we moved up to the 17th is that a significant fraction of the calls, more than 30%, dealt with reception issues. This suggests that there's more we can do to help educate and prepare people to anticipate reception issues and, where possible, resolve them in advance. In particular, we need to make people aware that in addition to obtaining a converter box and setting it up and connected, they really want to get that set up as sooner the better, so they can also check whether they've got any problems with their antenna and do something about it before things have gone dark. We plan to continue to refine and improve the mapping tool in our antenna guide. We're working in collaboration with a number of the stakeholders, including the Association for Maximum Service Television, the Consumer Electronics Association, and NAB, and the Consumers Union to provide better information and guidance to consumers about how to deal with reception and antenna issues. The Commission also recently proposed, as Eloise discussed, to amend the education requirements for broadcasters to require a station to disclose when 2% or more of its analog viewers are not expected to receive its digital signal due to a shift in the station's coverage area. We're also encouraging stations to provide service to lost coverage areas, such as by implementing distributed transmission systems and low-power repeaters and translators. But realistically, it may not be possible to deploy such systems and repeaters on a wide-scale basis before June 12th. That said, we anticipate many broadcasters will continue to make improvements to their coverage over time. An additional lesson learned relates to the scanning of converter boxes. We discovered that in some cases, when a current digital station was changing to a new digital RF channel, you needed to perform a complete new channel scan. In other words, not just use the update scan, because what would happen is the box said it would ignore the updated channel because it said, I've already got that channel, this can't be right. So part of our advice, I think, going forward will be to tell people to use the complete rescan function, and we plan to put out better guidance for consumers on that point. In summary, we were able to make a great deal of progress towards enabling a smoother transition in the period that led up to February 17th, but we also learned some important lessons that will help to better prepare for the greater number of stations that will be making the transition ahead. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, we appreciate all of your support and look forward to working collectively to meeting many of the challenges that lie ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. That is one cool tool, and we thank you, and we thank the ingenious inventors of it sitting behind you once again. And helps not just consumers directly who can access it, but when I was at the call center in Gettysburg last week, those folks who are manning the telephones are using it a lot, too, when somebody calls in who may not even know that we have this website and can help identify problems. So it's a great help. Andrew.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you. I think last month when I was here, I left off as we were in the throes of coordination, so I think I'll start with a brief timeline that I'll describe what has happened since the en banc last time around, but more importantly, since January 16th. So I think there'll be there we go. Basically, what we're throwing here is similar to what Gary started with on the lines of what was happening during this time frame. The call center can be somewhat arbitrarily broken up into three phases. The first one being the call center planning and orientation standpoint. The middle time frame being primarily February 12th through the 21st, which is the principal time that the IBM, our contracted resources, were on board. And then after that, subsequently the February 22nd to the March 31st timeline, which explains is where the industry and the FCC continue to work the call volumes together. I won't go through the details of the slide in the interest of time, but you'll see that, and I believe it was expressed earlier, that as the Commission took actions and made decisions based upon different broadcaster transition dates, the call center was in a position to respond to that. But briefly, if we go to the next slide, you'll see that what this call center coordination ultimately resulted in is basically the overview chart you see in front of you. And although it's a very complicated entity, it basically says coming in the front door was our single number. We distributed those calls across multiple, what I'll call interactive voice responses, or multiple gateways, which then handed those calls off to the third row of boxes, which were all call centers. And as you get into those call centers, you'll see in many instances those were call centers of physical locations where you had people in a single building doing things, but oftentimes it was call centers of work-at-home agents. So it is probably safe to say that the distribution of call center agents was definitely nationwide during this event. And proceeding on, the real question is what happened during the 12th through the 21st. So what you're seeing there is the call volume starting from January 24th through February 21st. You can see the obvious peaks come the 17th and 18th. and the color coding shades as far as where the calls were being handled. So roughly there was a 50-50 split during the timeline. A little, we did distribution based upon the agent seats at the time, and that's kind of how that played out. So we saw a spike. More to that, if you dig into those calls, is kind of what information were we seeing during that time frame. I think some of this stuff comes out and is somewhat obvious. As historically, we've had some calls about the coupon program, and we continued to get those during that time frame. And I think it's important to note that because we only had 15% of the population being significantly impacted, we would continue to get those coupon questions. And more as time goes on, those coupon questions tend to run parallel to information about the coupon program being distributed across the media. But more importantly, as a lot of my colleagues here on the panel have mentioned, the reception issues and the technical issues became much more pronounced, especially as we moved towards the 17th and 18th. In fact, if you dig a little more into the specific DMAs where we lost, where there was a full transition to digital, you'll actually see that the coupon question has gone away, and almost 50% of the questions come into that realm of reception and scanning and antennas. So you can, I think everyone's said it, but I think we've learned that is the area that we need to concentrate on. You'll also see the language breakout, 8% Spanish and 92% English. I think we were planning on somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% to 80% Spanish to English. Nationwide, if you look at the census data, you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 to 20% of the country speaks Spanish. A lot of that has to do with where the markets at transition were impacted. So I think, in addition, there's another side story there that, yes, only 15% of the population was impacted, but we also know of that 15% of the population, it was not a heavily Spanish-speaking population. Finally, we move into that third phase, and what are we doing, and how do we kind of take some of the lessons learned, which I'll get into next. But so here's what happened. There's always a discussion about the call volume and the projections. We know for that period of February 12th through February 21st, before the Delay Act was passed, we were looking at a neighborhood of 2.7 million calls with projections. The assumptions are based upon the Wilmington and Hawaii information that we've had, and they're also based upon the behavior of consumers in a market that is fully transitioning. And I think it's an important point as we get a little farther on. We saw 417 broadcast stations decide to go on 217, roughly equating to the 15% of the households significantly impacted, and 11 full market transitions. The projected call volume, if you run them through the model, would give you somewhere in the neighborhood of 625,000 calls. The actual call volume was 152,000 calls. Now, this is where I'll refer back to the area about the full market transition. When you look at the model, it assumes that the consumer is going to behave in a manner as if they're not getting any signals. And that is because the Hawaii and the North Carolina data inform that mindset. So the 152,000 is probably not the best number to gear off of. What we do know is we've looked at, additionally, that includes the calls we got at the call center. There were many broadcaster and market-based call centers that took additional calls that, in some instances, we've seen somewhere in the neighborhood of about a 50-50 split between the national call center and the local market call volume, that you could run that 152,000 much higher in order to get a full picture of what the calls were during that time frame. But we know we have 11 full market transitions during the 217 event, and we know we have Hawaii, North, and Wilmington. So we have a total of 13 DMAs, and what we're doing at this point now is we're combing through that data to find out what makes sense and what doesn't make sense as far as projecting out to the future and seeing what happens. Some of the critical pieces are, is OTA household counts, is that the correct barometer to be looking at? This is something that we have focused on heavily, but we want to validate and test that concept to see if that makes sense. With the March 17th deadline coming up, that'll give us some information as far as how that distribution of the balance of stations will be over this 3-month period. If it's going to be more of a June 12th event, will there be bumps along the way, or will it be some other entity? We don't know, but we'll need to calculate that from the March 17th data in order to figure out who's going when. And then basically, if you look at the 11 DMAs and digging into those DMAs on a very specific basis and seeing, what is unique about those, or what is more importantly, what is common across those DMAs in order to determine what the correct predictors are in order to scale ourselves for the next couple of months. And then if I come to the lessons learned, simplifying it into three basic things. The infrastructure and the telecommunications piece of the operation. We found that it takes a lot of resources and a lot of coordination to move calls nationwide through multiple platforms and multiple partners. That is a very resource-intensive and challenging venue, and I think the 8-hour conference calls that people were having during the period of the 28th through the 12th, and then throughout the episode, and even today, this day, we're still having those coordination calls. We think it might be valuable to look at a single gateway or a single IVR or a single front end for the calls to come to. It would simplify that piece quite a bit. There's a discussion about the agent experience. So, and I think it was mentioned earlier that when we walked into the February 17th timeline, given the time constraints getting to that, in order to scale efficiently, we were not able to get to the depth of agent experience that I think may prove more useful given the problems that we have seen in the recent transition. And by that, I will say there's roughly two models of call centers. One is or it's a spectrum rather, but on one side you have a very high-level call center where you're answering lots of questions, but you're maybe an inch deep and a mile wide. On the other end of the spectrum, you see something more on par with a consumer help desk, computer help desk, or maybe a software company providing you support, where you have agents who are very specialized and have quite a bit of depth in that field and can go through and troubleshoot and do more diagnostic testing as far as what's going on. Given the time that we had for the February 17th event, we were much more heavily weighted on the call center high-level model. We have the opportunity, I think, or the potential to move toward a much more service desk or help desk-oriented approach. And the critical element there is training of the agents. So if you have several weeks to train agents, you can get to that level of depth. And it's important to note that there's a compromise to that. The more you train expert agents, the less able you are to handle volume, because your call lengths do extend, and resources are always in or high demand or short supply, as the case may be. And then finally, as a third order lessons learned that we found is the reporting piece, and I'll separate this roughly into two categories. One is the actionable information. So as you coordinate across over a dozen different reporting entities into a single location and managing that data throughout the event, you have a lot of manual reconciliation and trying to get information out of it in a reasonably fast time so that people, such as the outreach groups, the commission itself, can act should something come to light. The other piece of the information I would look at is what we've seen with the resource map and some of the resource portals that we've put out there during this time frame to assist the agents and have subsequently made public. There is a lot of information out there, and I think some of the participants at the earlier en banc had stated that the idea of a central database or one central location for all this information would be valuable. We took some steps to try to get something in place for that. I think we have time to go back and revisit and beef up that presence, if you will, so that we can get more information out to the participants. I mean, the information is generally focused on two areas. You have the national information, and then you have, more importantly, what are those local resources, and how can you target a consumer to a given location and tell them what's going on in their neighborhood. So we're exploring those ideas. We have some things in place, but I thought I'd keep this brief because I'm sure there are many questions ahead of us, and I thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, and that's very helpful. This is not an exact science, and I know it's difficult to gauge these things, and I think you're doing a great job in doing that. Just a comment on the issue of agent experience has come up, and I want to make sure that everybody understands that it has nothing to do with the caliber of the agents, but our ability and time sufficient to train them to the degree that they would like to be trained. I was in Gettysburg, talked to a number of these people, watched them and listened to them do the calls just a week ago, and they are not only enormously talented and already pretty well trained, but they are actually enthused about the opportunity to learn more. They were just thrilled to have the tool, and they got on top of that real quick and are using that to help folks. So we're grateful to them. I think a couple of important points to take away from your conversation: we still need to be prepared for millions of calls between now and June, and how you calibrate, how much is going to go into boots on the ground and this, that, and the other thing. And the call center, which is kind of the final line, is those are difficult calls to make. And I think the other noteworthy thing here is let's all keep in mind that 25 or 30%, as you said, of those calls from people are having reception problems and coverage problems, and we've just got to put that way out on the front burner. We've got to get the word out. It's not the first word that broadcasters want to get out. I'm sure that people in their listening area might be losing a signal, but it's absolutely essential to get that out. You already have answered a lot of my questions. I know we're running kind of late, but I want to give Commissioner Adelstein and Commissioner McDowell an opportunity to ask a question or two before we move on to the final panel.
Well, just real briefly, Mr. Chairman. Kathy, you mentioned that we're talking to AmeriCorps. I mentioned in my opening statement that back in 2007 in September, I suggested we partner with AmeriCorps, and now we're finally getting around to it. Now that we have a new chairman, I understand the White House has been helpful in trying to move that forward as well. Could you tell us what the status of our preliminary discussions are with the people from AmeriCorps and what we can look to see in terms of help on the ground?
Sure. I think the National CCC, I think it stands for National Civilian Corps, that is a part of the AmeriCorps Senior Corps organization. They have students who range in age from 18 to 24 at campuses located in 4 different places around the country. And these individuals bring a great deal of experience with respect to community-based assistant projects. And at least initial discussions thus far indicate a real willingness and desire to help with the DTV efforts that we're talking about, specifically with respect to potentially in-home installation assistance. And one of the things, in one of the conversations that I thought was really interesting and telling, they were talking about some of the projects these folks had worked on in the past and how there were plans put in place and a program and expectations in terms of the time that it would take to accomplish this specific task by these people. And it was envisioned to take about a month. And the time frame it took these people was a week. So I think to the extent the opportunity really does come to fruition, I think we will have some really talented people that will assist and complement the efforts already underway and really provide that last mile of help that some consumers are going to need. And as I said, I think the discussions so far have been very cooperative, very interesting, and I think it will be a real asset if it works out.
Well, great. In the spirit of never being too late, one of the good things that we did do was reach out to local governments. I know that we talked in your testimony about the need for us to engage local governments. Everywhere I've gone, I've found that they're very interested in helping and identifying resources, even under the difficult circumstances that all these local governments are facing, to help us. Just last month, I appeared in front of the LA City Council, and we had quite a discussion about what LA could do to help with its huge population. One of the good things that we did in the past was this so-called mayor's initiative. I remember we were reaching out to all the different mayors and trying to work with local governments to identify how they could help us. But I recall somehow that just kind of fizzled out. And I wonder if you could tell us, A, what happened to that mayor's initiative, and B, what are we doing now to reach out to local governments in a systematic way to see how we can involve them in helping us on the ground?
I think, as you mentioned, in the past there was a really widespread campaign to reach literally thousands of mayors around the country, not just the mayors from the big and urban cities, but mayors from some of the smaller communities, recognizing that in smaller towns sometimes the mayor is, a very integral part of the community and well positioned to reach consumers in that community. So there were attempts along the way. I think throughout the process, I think that the FCC staff who were in communities around the country, they in many cases were able to develop one-on-one a rapport with particular individuals in the mayor's offices, through which they did a number of local events and activities. But it really varied from place to place. And I think your point about whether to kind of re-energize an effort to direct efforts on a more nationwide basis and to engage the help of local governments is probably in order and something we're looking at doing, and as I said, reinvigorating.
Well, great. I hope we will revive that and make it systematic so that we can reach out to all those cities. Andrew, just one quick question. One of the extraordinary things about your testimony here was how few calls we got, essentially how we got 25% of what we anticipated on the 17th, even after vastly lowering our projections. And even if you double that because of the number of calls that were given to other entities like local broadcasters, still we got half as many calls as we expected. Now, based on that, what's your sort of anticipated range of what we can expect on June 12th? How many calls do you think we might get based on your early analysis?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've looked at some of those DMAs more closely, and we're still in the process of analyzing those. The range is really large. I mean, I can calculate a range anywhere between 600,000 and 3 million calls. So there's so much variance in that range, and that's why I'm hesitant to go out and say, okay, this is the number that looks appropriate. We do know, though, that Hawaii and Wilmington were very similar as far as their response to the transition. Initial indications indicate that Greenville may have the same characteristics to that transition, and Providence seems to be up in that area also. So those 4 markets seem to have a similar pattern. I suspect what needs to be looked at is some of the readiness measures of those markets and some of the similarities between the markets. I think there might be a rural-urban difference between those markets that may help inform us as far as what makes sense. So it would be, I think, as the chairman mentioned, I think millions of calls is still on the table, and I think it'd be premature at this point to mention what that number is, but it's going to be an issue.
Okay, thanks.
In that regard, as I said, this is not an exact science, and in an effort like this, you can do one of two things. You can do too little, or you can do too much. And for my money in something like this, with millions of consumers and so many households still unprepared, I'm all for erring on the side of too much. That doesn't mean you prepare for a huge cataclysm that has no chance of developing. But if there's a range there, I think you go with the larger range, and then thank heavens afterward if it doesn't really evolve into that much. Commissioner McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and big kudos to you, Andrew, for really helping turn this around, and also our private sector partners with NAB and NCTA contributing to the effort. Before I get more into call center, I want to ask Eloise a quick question, because I do want us to get on to the next panel too, which is, okay, can you drill down a little bit more on the significance of March 17th? Other than being St. Patrick's Day, I did wear my St. Patrick's Day tie. Yes, and you're wearing the green, too, I see, from the O'Gore clan, yes.
The O'Gore clan, yes.
Or was it McGore?
Thank you.
So, other than it being St. Patrick's Day, do you have a sense of, in your talks with broadcasters, of an unscientific sampling of who might want to go when, based on that deadline, which hasn't arrived yet? So.
Well, I think the good answer to your question is we don't know. We've gotten some of the comments, looking at them quickly because my colleagues really have begun summarizing them. There are some public television stations that are very eager to transition as soon as they can. They're making financial arguments. They're saying that they had wanted to go on February 17th and they held off, but they really actually would like to go before April. So that's there's a set of 5 or 6 of those among the comments. Wanting to do something other than what we proposed, that is to go in March. As far as the commercial stations, we have 1 or 2 comments in that regard, but we don't have a real indication now. I gather that a lot of the owned and operated network stations have said that they're going to stay on until June 12th, but the other network affiliates, we're really not sure yet, and that was why we all collaborated on choosing that March 17th date, because we needed to make sure that we had finished the rulemaking so that we would have our procedures in place so that stations would know what they were electing for, but also to get that information as quickly as possible, because everything that you're hearing from everyone here is we need to know who wants to go and where. We need to look at whether that's going to work, what they're going to provide in terms of making sure that their viewers continue to be served in some fashion. So I haven't heard anybody with a really good, solid, confident prediction, and so I think we're just going to need to wait. We're going to try to get the rulemaking out as soon as we can, and stations are going to be allowed to notify us as soon as we get those procedures and forms in place, and that could be, we hope, as early as the end of next week, so that we may not have to wait until March 17th to begin to see what stations want to do.
Great. So we'll make those decisions over a pint of Guinness, then, is what you're saying. So, okay, very good. So, Andrew, okay, then I want to kind of drill down a little bit on maybe your personal preference or what your gut might be telling you right now. And just sort of as background, the industry efforts to sign up and contribute to the call center challenge were really geared towards budgets that were focused on February 17th. So this is before Congress moved the deadline. There are resource issues. Some of it can be spread out, but only for so long. We don't know, based on what we're going to do just yet, vis-a-vis, are there going to be some other spikes between now and June 12th. You've talked about the difference between being an inch deep and a mile wide versus a mile deep and an inch wide for the call center training, and how that will affect the bandwidth, the capacity of the call centers. So we have a lot of variables, at least 3 or 4 or 5, I think, that I just ticked off there. In terms of adequate resources, as Chairman Copps was saying, we would much rather be here saying, defending criticisms that we were overbuilt for this rather than underbuilt. Where do you see it going in partnership with the private industry and our own call center? What would be your preference based on that wild range you've got of, was it 600,000 to 3 million calls around June 12th? And then we don't know how much time each operator can spend with each caller. So if you had to guess right now, and I'm not going to hold you to it at all, but if you could guess right now, what would be the ideal situation in your mind?
And this is not, I'm not speaking for the commission here, obviously. My opinion would be that I think we need to move an agent to a more deeper agent, if you will, a more trained, educated agent who can sit there and spend longer than what we initially projected for the call length. So there's always that trade-off. As the longer the call gets, the lower the volume you can handle, and that becomes another issue. So we were originally looking at 4.8 minutes or so for the average call handle time during the February 17th event. I think something around the neighborhood of double that gives the consumer a better opportunity to being serviced and resolved, having their issues resolved on the phone. I think there is a critical point there where at some point, even after we've gone through the checklist and the diagnostics and gone to the reception map, there really is a question there that only the local broadcasters can really answer. We can only do so much sitting afar from where that location is happening, and I think there's probably a cutoff there where we hand off to the broadcasters and say, okay, you've got a consumer in this location. It's your problem. You need to figure out what it is with your signal that can't reach them. But I think that helps both parties on some level. I think we can focus, at least anecdotally, we've seen from the broadcasters that they were getting lots of calls about coupons, lots of calls about converter boxes. I think that is something that is better suited for us to handle on the national level, and then they can focus their efforts on dealing with the signal and their signal issues within their market. So I would say a more thoroughly trained agent, leading to a higher skill level, which then can do a more diagnostic approach towards the calls coming in, and then using the broadcasters to focus on what's going on in their particular neck of the woods, or perhaps some other entity in that arena. Society of Broadcast Engineers can get together and do something along those lines. But I think that would be the ideal setup from what I've seen to date. There are other machinations there, but I think that one has the highest probability of success.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we need to get on to the second panel.
Okay, with that, we will excuse the panel with hearty thanks for excellent presentations and very informative and helpful. And with the indulgence of my colleagues and their approval, I think we'll just move right into the second panel without taking a break. And they're leaving. Okay, yeah, good luck to you. Thanks. He'll try to come back on. Please do. Okay, where'd the secretary go? She just went to the ladies' room or what? Oh, okay, all right, that's it.